I'm Dr. Kim. I'm just your MC tonight, or today, and tomorrow. And I'd like to introduce Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. He's going to be speaking on permaculture today. And thank you for attending. And here he is.
So let me start by asking how many of you know who I am? Okay, about half. So let me qualify myself for the rest of you. How's my audio? Good?
Excellent.
Okay.
It's kind of loud.
Loud.
I can turn it down.
I'll be back here. Is it better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So I got my start as a geologist as far as academics. I taught at Temple University in Philadelphia in the early 90s. I got my Bachelor of Science in Geology. And then I was offered the only scholarship to grad school that was offered. I was not the top student. I was like 10th or 12th out of 30. So when I got this letter, they wanted to pay for me to continue to party and go to college, so I just stayed there. And it turns out that it really was a turning point for me because that was the beginning of global warming, and that was when all funding in science shifted. It went from science to policy. Now in earth sciences, if you're not talking about global warming or climate change, you don't get any money, which is killing science. So that's how I got started. And my field of expertise is paleoclimatology. So I'm a stratigrapher, and I study invertebrate paleontology, which is 99% of everything. People with bones and dinosaurs and stuff comprises very little of all life on Earth, just basically a smidgen. So as an invertebrate paleontologist, you can study climate cycles, and that was my specialty. And there was just no funding in me saying that global warming was part of a cycle. So that didn't work out for me. In fact, I had to fund my own master's thesis. Pennsylvania gave me a few $100s for a hotel room. And I got out of academia because my field of study was not being funded. So that being said, I traveled through life disillusioned for a while. And I'm an alcoholic, but I'm a sober alcoholic now. My life quickly tumbled downward. I ended up in prison for felonies for growing marijuana, by the way, which now I'm a marijuana farmer, legal in Colorado. Imagine that. I was told I was never allowed to come in contact with marijuana ever. That was part of my sentence. Little did they know. Okay, so that being said, let's bring it full circle. I got my growing start in illegal guerrilla growing of cannabis. Now, the reason I started growing cannabis is because, I'm an addict, and the reason I was self-medicating with alcohol is because I have mental illness. So the way that the industry works is they give you drugs for that. And then I was put on every type of strange pharmaceutical you could name. Pharmaceuticals for epilepsy, for my depression. I mean, it didn't even make any sense. They made me fat, they made me sick, they made me crazier. I started hallucinating. When I quickly found out that cannabis did everything I needed that these drugs weren't doing, so I started self-medicating with cannabis. It's very illegal, hard to get back in the 80s and 90s where I lived, so I started growing it. And that was what got me into this world of crime. Flashback to 2012, my 10-year sentence ended, and I was finally allowed to leave the tri-state area, and I came right here to Pagosa Springs. And the reason I came here is in my spiritual awakening and sobering up period, and also dealing with the criminal justice system, I started to realize some of the horrible things happening on the planet. Now, I worked in nonprofits for 5 years, and I quickly became one of the top fundraisers for the groups like Planned Parenthood, Nature.org, the ACLU, and other groups, which I didn't necessarily believe in the missions of these groups, because when you get right down to the brass tacks and nonprofits, 95% of all the money you raise is to pay for the employees. And almost none of the money helps any of the shit you lied to the people to get the money for you to do. And so that happened. And then Occupy Philly happened. And I quickly moved to Philadelphia to say you to the government. And I learned some things. I learned that a bunch of strangers can do more in a short period of time than I had ever seen happen anywhere in my entire life. Where within a period of 10 days, we were feeding 4,000 homeless people more efficiently than the city's homeless shelter network could do in a 50-year period. We were embarrassing them. A bunch of scumbag hippies that took over City Hall was keeping City Hall cleaner than it had been kept by the own employees in Philadelphia. Homeless people were coming from New Jersey to eat dinner at Occupy Philly. That's how crazy it was. And so shortly after Occupy Philly was broken up, I started the worldwide movement, the March Against Monsanto. About 50 organizers worldwide took it upon ourselves to launch one of the largest independently organized marches in world history. We had what's estimated 50 million people marching in 32,000 plus cities worldwide. It was reported on in under 20 newspapers worldwide. And all of those were independently owned. So the mainstream media prevented any of that information getting out to what I like to call the fodder, the sheep, the useless eaters. And that's what these elites refer to all of us as, useless eaters. And if you don't believe that, then you have a lot of research to do. But we're just useless eaters, which is why they can convince Republicans, and they can convince Democrats, and they can convince libertarians that everyone is worse than everyone else. Because they're not providing any solutions to our problems. There are no solutions to world hunger. There's just more chemicals and toxic food, which makes people sicker. And their solutions come from the very chemical companies that provide the poisons that are killing our bees, that they now have to dump on the seeds that go into our supermarkets. And yet there's a left and a right. But they're all eating the same poison food because it's all in the same supermarkets. Now, what does this have to do with permaculture? It has to do with the solution. If you're left-wing or you're right-wing or you're libertarian, you all believe that something is coming. Either the world is going to blow up, the world is going to burn up, they're going to take your guns, the school system is indoctrinated, right? The grid is going to fail. I'm going to die of cancer. I'm never going to have enough money to retire. It doesn't matter what the narrative is. It doesn't matter what side you are on. There are no solutions being provided for you. The solution to global warming is alternative energy. All of the people on the left believe that alternative energy is cleaner and safer than fossil fuels. When if you just research for 1 hour, I guarantee you'll find that the raping and the mining of the rare earth elements for windmills and the toxicity of the solar panel industry polluting the planet pales in comparison to a frack well. And I'm completely anti-fracking because 100% of all frack well cases will fail. As a geologist, I know this. But not one oil and gas company will tell you that. That all of the groundwater in the entire world will be toxic for the next 50,000 years because of fracking. So, I mean, these are the facts, and they're being perpetrated by both sides. Now, as a geologist and a scientist studying all these things, the one thing we have to worry about is happening right now, and it is a magnetic excursion of the Earth. We're in a magnetic reversal. The Earth's poles began shifting radically at the end of the 20th, at the beginning of 1900. And around 1910, the North Pole started moving towards Siberia, and the South Pole was doing the same. If we base calculations on the new update of the World Magnetic Model, which they're re-updating in just a few months, what we're going to find is that the North and South Pole are moving hundreds of miles a year, and the increase has been exponentially increasing. If we project this out based on current knowledge, and if you don't know why NASA just sent up the new Parker Solar Probe, it's exactly what I'm telling you. And if you think NASA's going to warn of an extinction level event during a magnetic reversal, you're crazy too. because that's not something they tell you about. But that's why I'm here talking about permaculture after I said all this weird shit.
Diamond, talk about, what are you going to tell us about permaculture?
Because permaculture is the solution to all of these problems. It's the solution to global warming. It's the solution to a mini ice age. It's a solution to global cooling. It's a solution to genetically modified organisms. It's a solution to the grid failure. Because when the sun reactivates during the next solar cycle and our magnetosphere wanes, there's a very high probability that the grid will begin to fail. We've already seen infrastructure failing. We're well overdue for a Carrington or greater event, and the last X-flare was in October of 2017. We have one X-flare a year, so now we're in a deficit of major flares. So what happens in a magnetic reversal, and you'll be able to follow this if you do some research, follow the world magnetic model, you'll be able to watch on your own what's happening. So first what happens is there's anomalous weather, which the mainstream is going to blame on whatever they want. There's increased cloud cover due to increased cosmic rays. So we're seeing record flooding worldwide because if you want to research some science, check out Svensmark and the cloud experiment. And also our own government tried to debunk this. At CERN, they have the cloud experiment there, which proved Svensmark's work and exactly what I'm telling you. That in the next 10 or 20 years, there's going to be epic biblical flooding, more cloud cover than you've ever seen. And unfortunately, as a paleontologist, we're going to be living an evolutionary event. The one thing that we know that causes evolution and mutation in genes is cosmic rays. There's nothing else that we know of on Earth as scientists but cosmic rays that cause these mutations. There's no way to shield from them either. So people think they're going to go underground or I don't know what they think. But you cannot escape them. And at the same time, more radiation from the sun is going to be coming in the form of UVA, UVB. But the good news is that we've been here for millions of years. It's my belief that humanoid people have probably been around since the Eocene extinction, which is about 5 million years for people just like us on Earth. But we constantly get destroyed regularly due to major catastrophic events that happen every 100,000 and 26,000 and 12,000 years. And the Bible describes the Iron Cross version of this, where there's actually 4 catastrophes every procession, and that would be the 6,400-year flood cycle. We're now in the sea level fall surface, so we're on our own. The government we're on our own from the government who's poisoning us. We're on our own from the political sides which are dividing us. And soon, let's just say, what happens if the grid goes down locally here, and they say it's not coming on for a year? The food will never be delivered. I was just talking to someone at the energy fair, and they don't grow food. Like, I figured I'd come here to Crestone and everyone would at least grow pot and a tomato plant. But they said, no, my neighbors grow that. So it's imperative that we all start growing food or learning how to grow food, because I came out to Pagosa to start a permaculture farm. I studied all the permaculture books, and everyone has an opinion. And when you start doing your own permaculture on your own property, all their opinions they suck, because they did it on their property. And Pagosa Springs is not like Bill Mullison's tropical Australia, where I don't even have those guilds. But it's interesting because it all comes back. This is a religious mecca here. And the truth that I find always comes back to some expression. And this is the Taoist ideology, is permaculture, where everything that we need exists right before our very eyes, and we need to utilize it. So after I had read all the books, and after I had seen that you can get a degree in permaculture and learn design, none of that matters, because the design exists here where you live. And if you're in Crestone and you want to be a permaculture master, you just go up into the higher elevations and down into the lower elevations, and you observe and you interact with everything in the natural biome. You turn over the leaf matter, you look at what's happening, and you repeat this. And after 1,000, maybe 5,000 walks, you'll learn 1% of what you need to know for permaculture. You're not going to learn it in a book. which is a good start. You're not going to learn it on a YouTube channel. You're going to learn it by failing on your own property. And you learn that, what works, by going into the woods. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. Almost 80% of everything I ever planted in the first 3 years was eaten, destroyed, or failed. And it starts to wear on your soul. But at some point, something works. And then it becomes amazing. And it's that spark, which the knowledge that you gain by accident, by interacting with nature, and by looking at natural systems that already exist, that are doing a great job, that we can learn that we probably don't need renewable energy or oil and gas to begin with. Because it's interesting, when you look at all of the ancient cultures, or go all the way back, there's very little evidence of disgusting hominids like us that fill giant holes on our earth with trash, or that pollute the groundwater for the entire planet for tens of thousands of years. I can't think of any ancient culture that's that disgusting as the one we're in. And yet, the political systems have allowed it to become an argument between neighbors. And instead of a solution, they're creating a problem. And I don't think many people see that. I mean, I saw the problem in jail, but the way I was treated in prison, like worse than an animal. And the guards didn't know who I was. They didn't know I got a scholarship to graduate school, or I was like a smart person maybe, or that I was sick and I was suffering from the disease of addiction. They didn't know that. They could care less. They were paid to make me feel like shit, and that's what they do. And this is the world we live in. And now there is hope, and the hope is permaculture, because permaculture is the solution to all of our problems. Because if you start using natural forest systems and you go back to the source, there's something in geology called residence time, which means if you and I stop screwing with it, eventually it will get better. Yeah, and some is worse than others. Like the residence time of our groundwater on Earth is going to be a very long time. We don't have to worry about our future generations, because we're fucked for like 50,000 years. We need to go off planet because we've destroyed this one. And that's what these rich elites are actually thinking. They're like, all right, well, this is all going to be used up in 12 years, so let's get them out of here and do it somewhere else. And is that really what we want? But yet I don't see very many people reacting. I see people arguing about semantics and very few solutions, which is why I chose to opt out. My partner and I chose to opt out of society, which takes a very long time. You have to create a sustainable permaculture homestead, which means you need enough land to provide all the food and resources you could need forever, till you die. So you're going to need lots of acres of wood, and you're going to have to start failing at growing food, especially in an area like this, that we only have less than 90 days in Pagosa. So you're going to need greenhouses, and you're going to need help. And the one thing I found about permaculture solutions in this area is you're going to need to meet other people doing what you're doing, because that's where you gain all the knowledge. I gain more information talking to strangers today that I will implement at my ranch than I did all year. So you need to get out. A lot of people are reclusive. They only hang in their circles. You have to think outside of the box. You have to go a different way home. That's all I'm asking. Because what I found is that all of my successes only come from failures. And once I was so depressed that I thought that all my failures was because I was a failure. I didn't see it right. The only way I've learned anything is because I've made a mistake. The only reason that I recovered is because I fell over. You can't get well unless you're sick. Think about it. And this planet is sick. And humanity is sick. The food we eat is food for sheep. And you've allowed it to go that way. They've bastardized the labeling system. I mean, I fought hard in the halls of government to get food labeled, and then the multinational corporations crushed our labeling bill smothered it and made it some kind of a barcode that no one will ever find out what's in their food. They will never find out because they don't care. When I started organizing for the March Against Monsanto in Fairmount Park, I simply stood in Rittenhouse Square, actually is where I started, and I questioned the public walking through there. 10,000 people a weekend. Do you know what a genetically modified organism is? I got 2 yeses the first year. By the 3rd year, there was a tipping point. 10% of the people knew what it was, but they didn't want to know. See? So even if you learn what's bad for you, you'll still eat it. Even if you learn how to get well, you'll still do what keeps you sick. And that is the problem with our society and humanity. But there is more hope, and that's permaculture. Because thinking outside of the box, growing your own food, what you start to do, and this is what the multinational corporations have done to you, sicken you, close your pineal gland, close up that third eye, is they've removed the nutrition from the food and it still looks good. Even organic food is less nutrient dense. Most of the honey in this top super here, and we want to keep him down in there. He's going to stay till next winter, but this is the one I'm trying to take out here, which is the Ross Round honey super. So we're going to see what that looks like in just a second. Now, take this baby off. Oh yeah!
Oh wow, look at all those guys.
That's a lot of honey in there.
That's heavy.
And now, so this Ross Round has has got some, they're capping it. But it's far from being capped completely, so let me try not to kill any bees here.
They look pretty smooth.
Let's take out one of these rounds. One of these that they're capping. So this is some nectar that they're just pulling into here. And these are all workers. You can see it's just some nice shiny nectar. I'd actually like to keep that one out. We could. That way we can get in here deeper. And just look at how many bees are in here working on all these. So here's a nice capped honey. This is what makes it so heavy. The next 6 frames they're capping it and filled with honey now.
Wow.
That one's completely capped. And so we can just, here, get that, eat it. And I'm gonna get it too.
I wonder why people freak out about bees. I don't get it. That was delicious.
I bet.
I noticed they don't like my zoom ins.
So what I'm doing here is really important. Because this is being capped, it's important that all these frames touch again exactly on wood. And that has to do with this Langstroth bee spacing here. So if you don't, and then I just tighten them all back up. Okay.
And you know what's cool about having the honey on your mouth? When you blow the bee off, they don't get pissed off.
No, because look, we got a little honey here. So see, them, they're...
Yeah, they like that smelled like our shit. There's blue on the bee and it left me alone.
And now we're gonna feed them a little bit because it's gonna be really dry and hot for the next 5 days. And this might be the last little rain we ever get.
That doesn't drown any of them?
There's a raft in there.
Oh, I got you.
So as I fill it, it floats.
Oh, and they'll all be on top of it.
Yeah. So that one raft on the other side's not floating, so I gotta make sure I unstick it. And there, perfect. So the feeders are full. Nobody got stung. The original bees that were on the cover are still there. I mean, that's how chill.
They're really not even freaked out that much right now.
The Italians, no. Other bee varieties that are making honey right now would be much more pissed off.
Just from being in their space.
Because they're making the honey now. Once they start stocking honey, certain bee varieties will protect the hive. So as soon as we started trying to go in there, they would all come out and sting us.
Wow.
But these guys are still. See you guys. No swarming. Keep making honey.
Right? Yeah, that was awesome.
And this is what these permaculture systems can provide. So there's really three keys to get started in abundance in your life. I'm going to promise you that something will change in your life that will require you to grow your own food in the near future. If you're going to be alive, you think, for 10 more years, you better start growing your own food. If you haven't seen the crop failures that have been occurring worldwide, and I don't care what you blame them on, they're happening. If you haven't seen the shrinkflation happening in the stores, where that same box you're looking at, you're like, what the is this? And you pull out that little thing that's now the same bar, and you're like, what is that? It's the same price and it's barely a bite. Fresh fruits are becoming more expensive and more difficult to acquire. And this is going to continue to increase, especially as we head in towards this holiday season. I implore you, if you see avocados at $9 and lettuce hits $14 or a loaf of bread is at $12 and you're not growing food, you're probably going to starve to death. Because if there's an accident with the grid, especially out here, within a few days people are going to be starving to death because no more shipments come in of food. And then all the food that your neighbor was growing gets eaten by everybody because you weren't growing food, remember? So all those resources that everyone's hoarding, all the preppers, that quickly gets used up. And then people get desperate. And none of us have ever lived in a desperate world with starving, desperate people. They were selling the flesh of their own children less than 100 years ago at butchers in Russia. That's a fact. And it's not the scare tactic, but do you remember being taught that in school? Do you remember being taught about wild edibles that grow in the forest in school?
Nope.
No, because it's by design. They want you to buy their products in their store. They don't want you to get the nutrition you need from nature for free. There are more wild edibles in Pagosa Springs than I could even imagine in such an extreme area. One of the reasons I moved there was because the upper elevations in the South San Juan wilderness have some of the most pristine and biodiverse medicinal plants which have been unchanged for over 50,000 years. Nowhere else on earth can you say that, which in a catastrophic geologist mind like this means that the South San Juans has been pretty safe for 50,000 years. And if you didn't know it, this is right nearby too, to that, because that's right there. So there's a reason why it's safe here. There's a reason why that the biodiversity at high elevations has been the same for a long period of time. And we're not near any major cities here. If a major grid failure happens, no one from New York is making it here. No one from Santa Fe is going to get here. It's just us. And we have a small enough group in Crestone and Pagosa and knowledgeable people that we can work together to get out of the hole.
We just need to start talking about it because it's more of a mental hit. If you wake up in the morning and the TV doesn't come on and your phone doesn't work, how are you going to know what's going on? And if in just 3 days you're going to be starving, shouldn't you be prepared? Now, a lot of you are thinking, Diamond's crazy, he's fucking crazy. But the one thing that will give you peace of mind is peace of mind. And knowing how to grow food, just like the forest does, knowing about wild edibles and the fact that, you know, if we needed to, we could eat those maple leaves. But there's 1,000 better choices, and they're all right there in the weed patch. These are food techniques we can go to. We can support each other eating our weeds. We can have weed eating parties. That sounds awesome. Where you actually eat weeds and smoke weeds. Both are legal. It's amazing. So these are just some of the few exciting things that bring permaculture to the table. Now, permaculture is not new either. Everyone thinks it's a new fad. Permaculture is the original way that we fed ourselves. The Garden of Eden is permaculture. Now, whether you believe in religion or not, that's a pretty good place to live. That's basically all I wanted to say. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about the spiritual awakening that got me here. But I want to share, do I have some time for questions and answers? I wanted to answer your questions if you have any for me, because I'm a wealth of useless information. So,
It's never for you.
are there any questions from the crowd?
Well, you were about to mention 3 important things that we know, and I was ready to type, but I don't know.
If you have nowhere to start, wild edibles. Because if you're a lazy prick and you don't want to plant a garden, you can always walk into the weeds. So many of our weeds are delicious and nutritious. In fact, stinging nettle is one of the most nutrient-dense plants per ounce that you can find in the world. And you can literally, in early, mid-spring, depending on your region,
Just use gloves.
yes, you can go find thousands of pounds of stinging nettle and dry it and literally have a stockpile of emergency reserve food that will keep an entire population alive. So wild edibles are key. Wildcrafting. And you notice all these 3 things have the same base. Wild. Wildcrafting. If we can't buy stuff anymore, we have to learn how to make it. I'll tell you, I've never been so satisfied when I went to a wild basket crafting workshop. They showed me how to peel bark off of a poplar tree, score it, and bend it into the most practical, awesome thing that I made out of tree bark and some grass and shit. Like, why wasn't I taught that in school? I was pissed. The same reason they didn't teach me how to eat plants that grow wild. Because schools are not learning centers. They're indoctrination facilities. And that's what I quickly learned. That the corrupt governments and multinational corporations are controlling everything. So we need to go backwards. We need to get out of that and go back to wild crafting, wild edibles, and wild
game,
yeah,
elk.
Yeah. Learn to use a weapon. Even if you're a pacifist, in a desperate situation, one animal could feed all of us. And then we could make bone broth out of that animal for months to come and still live. So learning how to hunt, wildcraft, which I don't call it hunting, I call it wild harvest. Because I wild harvest all kinds of live animals. I eat bugs and slugs and fish and crayfish. Because that's how we used to live. That's what we used to do. And it has all the nutrients. If I'm eating all the wild animals and plants in my area, those nutrients are going to protect me from all the diseases that are present in my area. That's why if you have allergies in a particular area and you eat the honey from that area, your allergies are alleviated. Because the bees have already figured out how to do that. They collect the pollen and it's a bee vaccine. Except it has no thimerosal. Yeah, it's good for you. So we need to go back to wild. It's all the wild things that we lost. And that was actually one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
So there is a solution, it's permaculture. The problem is government. The problem is that the government is now been bought by the 7 multinational corporations that control the world. That is the media conglomerates, big ag. It's disgusting. When I started researching Monsanto and you find out that all the CEOs that ever worked there worked as the head of the FDA, and it's a big circular cluster, and you're wondering, why would anyone trust the Food and Drug Administration? Well, they say it's safe. Well, they said it was safe. It was safe. Did they say that was safe? And then this is what we're finding out, that we went from glyphosate to Agent Orange. I don't know if you know that. The level of toxins on these foods is so disgusting that they actually did studies of homeless people in Europe 10 years ago, and all of their urine contained glyphosate. Homeless people's urine contained glyphosate. How did it get there? From the food they're eating, from the food scraps they're eating. It's in all breast milk they sample. Glyphosate, a pesticide. And if you read Genetic Roulette, which is a very disturbing book, you're going to find there's scientific evidence that if you eat enough genetically modified food, your gut bacteria will start making pesticide in your stomach, which then travels through your intestines. And we wonder where perforated bowels and gluten intolerance and all that shit comes from. Genetic Roulette. I believe it came out about 7 years ago.
So where, you know, with all these drugs that you're saying, where do you find like untouched seeds? Have you done any like seed banks? Do you know any place that is doing seed banks?
So I implore everyone to seed save. You start with the first packet of heirloom seeds, Baker Creek Heirlooms, really good source. The old Indian Creek Seed Company is now called True Leaf Market. They have heirloom certified organic seed, which goes back to the source. And you take that one pack and you plant the vegetable that year, and you learn how to seed save that. And what you're doing is you're creating a better seed that is adapted to where you just planted it. It's called, you're adjusting the land race. So you're creating your own version of whatever you want to grow. Because a lot of people keep buying seeds year after year from the seed store. Those seeds are not for your area. You buy them once and then you create a land race for your region. And that means learning how to seed save from peppers, tomatoes, so on and so forth. There's all different techniques. So those are the two I recommend. And then you can just come to my booth and I'll give you seeds that I have. I brought cilantro, I brought red auroch, which is purple mountain spinach. I have some other varieties of seeds, but they're all for 5A, which is around here in landrace in Pagosa, at about 7,000 feet. So they'd be perfect to plant here. So join a club, meet people that are permaculturalists or farming like I am, and seed saving, and we have unlimited seeds. I mean, I picked one cilantro plant. I seed saved one cilantro plant to bring here, and I was able to acquire 1.5 pounds of cilantro seed. I mean, that would cost like $3,000 in packets from Baker Creek. So abundance is easy, and it doesn't mean you have a lot of food. It means you have a lot of time, because you have a lot of micronutrients in your body and a lot less poison and a lot less depression and a lot less doctor visits and a lot more happiness. And not only that, your brain starts working, and then you get downloads from the universe, and then you start to get enlightened, and then you start to meditate, and you're like, what am I doing? And it comes from the nutrients in the food. And it's natural. You literally start to feel like you're supposed to feel. And so that's what I've learned. Like, if you get back to wildcrafting and wild harvesting, you become wild, like an animal, and it feels great. Doesn't it feel good to be alive? You know, a lot of people are always say, why are you smiling? What? Isn't that what I'm supposed to be doing? It's crazy. We should all be smiling. Everyone smile. People are like, stop, don't tell me that. That's a horrible thing. Any other questions? Yes.
I got one question. Is there any information that you know about books that kind of break things down into the angles of growing different crops on the slopes, like in this area, like they did in Incan times, where each area of the terraces faced a different direction and grew a different crop at a different time of the year because of the angle of light and stuff.
Yeah, so the Mayans and the ancient cultures were geniuses in this because they had the gift of observation. There are a few techniques in permaculture you'll quickly learn if you get a book, and these are things like restoration agriculture, where you simply take the topography of your land and you cut big scars on contour across that land. And this is so that as sheet flow runs down, it catches all the organic material and fills those gullies, and you start building your own natural soil from dust and the biologicals on your land. That's the first step. And then you start making larger lumps to control the water flow called swales. And this will direct the water all around your property and conserve it. And then you want your water to charge into your land and none of it to run off. So you can put some large hugel beds or hugel cultures at the end of your swale system to then catch all that runoff. And then that's how you begin. And then if you live on a slope, you'd want to cut terraces with big back slots in the rear. I have a terrace system, and until I cut a slot in the back of the terraces didn't charge. But once I cut that slot, now they charge. And then in different angles. So angles here, this sun is so severe that what I find in Pagosa is that half a day of shade is good. Makes crops better, like spinach. Spinach doesn't grow as prolific in full sun all day as it does in half shade. So you need to fail, you need to experiment, you need to do everything. More is better. If you can plant a seed in 8 different spaces with 8 different winds and 8 different amounts of sun, you're 8 times better off on knowing next year exactly where you're going to be planting that. That's how permaculture works. By design, by failure, by experimentation. Anybody else?
The biggest ranch.
We have 35 acres up high, 55 acres down below 7,000, which is not really good. So, it's in my experience, if you're looking for land and you want the longest growing season with the least fluctuation, the least wind, you want to be on the top of a ridge, not a high ridge, one of the lower ridges relative to in the area, but on the top. The top of a hill in this area, from here to Pagosa, in this whole area, is the most stable temperature. It's also the warmest nighttime temperature, low, and the lowest daytime high. Down where I am, it gets 114 and minus 30. It's ridiculous. But if you go up to Echo Ridge at 8,800, it almost never goes below freezing. And it's like 85 is the high there. And this is where you get the best results, because those low temperatures or those shocking nights here, they stunt all plants, all seeds. I can plant beets or other crops, and if it's just one cold night and the seedling's at the wrong stage, that plant will never grow. It just stays stunted forever. And then I need to put new seed in, and it'll react differently. Like I can have a squash get stunted, forget about it, and then plant another squash 3 weeks later that's full size while that's still 4 inches. So it's process of elimination and experimentation. Any other permaculture questions? What 1:30 somewhere else.
At the town hall stage.
Yes. I don't know where that is. Over that way.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you guys.